Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. I'm Rebecca Taylor, Head of Marketing at Enerflo. Thanks so much for joining today's webinar, co-hosted by Enerflo Co-Founder Pat Bennett and Product Owner Emily Yoshida. And with that, I'll hand it over to Pat to get things started.
Okay, thank you. I'm really excited about this. We've been talking about batteries a lot in Enerflo last year, trying to figure things out, I think, the rest of the market. And I feel like we have a pretty good solution we're excited to talk to you guys about today. Just quick high level of who Enerflo is for anyone joining who is not a current partner. We were founded in 2019. It's crazy that we've been doing this for about 6 years now, coming up on 6 years. We do support a lot of large groups in the industry. We have thousands of users, billions of dollars of deals are sold on Enerflo every year. And we focus very heavily on integrations. That's our thing. That allows us to have an end-to-end solution, everything from lead all the way to tracking projects through PTO. And the way we handle that, instead of trying to be the best at everything, we do a lot of integrations with a lot of great partners. And so you may see tools on here, icons of tools you're currently using. What we do is integrate with those tools, allow them to talk to each other and have all the data flow through. So it means cleaner deals and ensuring really smooth rep experiences. So typically when we're talking to partners, they're using a bunch of different tools, a lot of things that maybe don't talk to each other, trying to log in and out, open up multiple tabs, hand enter stuff. And we don't like manual entry here at Enerflo. So we like to create a really nice deal flow that allows everything to be in one spot. That way, when a project is or a deal is closed and it's sent to the ops team, that it has everything you need to run and get started without a lot of back and forth and change orders and all the issues that happen downstream. We like to avoid as much as possible upstream. So in a nutshell, that's what we do. We'll show some of that today, but really want to kick it off by talking about the state of storage, because it really has blown up in the last year. I remember when I was at RE Plus a couple months ago, I felt like every other booth was a storage company. So there's a lot of manufacturers building batteries. Storage is becoming more and more of our nomenclature. Adding storage to a battery system happens more and more. We're now seeing people sell storage and then adding solar on. And so we know storage is here to stay for a myriad of reasons. I'm going to talk through some of those reasons, some of the challenges we have when we're talking about storage. And we're going to have Emily show this new tool we've been working on for several months that we're really excited to unveil. If we look at our friends at Ohm Analytics provided some data for us as we talk through this, one of the main things we're seeing is higher and higher attachment rates. And if you just see in some of these places where these have skyrocketed over the last 6 months, it can be because of policy changes or changes to net metering programs or utilities or rebates or incentives. There's a lot of reasons why attachment rates are growing. And so regardless of market, regardless of where you're selling solar today, it's really important you understand batteries and this trend that's happening, because all of these policy changes and things that are happening in other markets, they could hit your market. And these things can happen quick, like we saw with NEM 3 in California almost 2 years ago. It's crazy. So why do we see high attachment rates? One thing to think through is there's this trend where net metering programs work really well in utilities before solar reaches kind of a 10% penetration rate. But as soon as that kind of sweet spot of 10% penetration rate happens, that's when we see reduced buyback programs come into play and net metering programs change. And you can see that as these states reach over this 10% level, you start seeing these states adopt different type of reduced buyback programs where they don't want to do a one-to-one net metering anymore. And so as we see states like New Jersey, New York, Texas, Oregon, as they reach a 10% penetration rate, we would assume, based on how things have happened historically, that utilities in those states will change to reduce buyback or changes to their net metering policies. And with this trend happening, and especially a lot of times policy kind of happens in California and then many other states adopt it, we know that this will continue. And so storage, the importance of it in these markets will become more and more important. The other thing we see from a backup standpoint is grid resiliency. We see every year last year, this Texas hailstorm that happened, where a lot of people, because of cold and freezing, knocked out a lot of power and the grid went down and people were without power. It seems like we hear more and more, like with what happened in North Carolina and hurricanes in Florida. And these are happening more, and it really puts a strain and a test on the grid. And so in many of these places, backup is becoming more and more important, where people are just fed up of having weeks or many days where they're without power. and they want to add their own battery to their system to add their own resiliency. And so there really is several reasons why you may want to add a battery. And we're going to talk more about those today and how we've solved those problems in Enerflo to make it easier for you. But essentially, there's a lot of trends happening out there that would make consumer demand increase, why we're seeing those higher attachment rates. Another reason is there's a ton of VPP programs, energy communities, and rebates going on as well. And these are typically state or utility driven, where they want to give consumers incentives to add storage and do that. And so these keep popping up. And so a lot of this data, again, is from, just a shout out to them. They're awesome. They track all this stuff. They have a huge repository of these rebates. You can know what might be going on in your markets. And understanding those is really important because that can help drive, obviously, how you pitch this and more savings that the consumers can get. So let's talk about how batteries can work in specific markets. I'm going to focus mainly on time of use and why batteries are becoming more important in those markets. And really, in California, it's nearly impossible to have a solar system that is actually going to yield you savings unless you attach a battery and kind of understand the science, if you will, of how that works. So if we take an ideal solar system today under a net metering, no storage system, essentially the way this is working is the grid is your battery, right? So anytime you create these peak sun hours or this overage of energy, all of that excess is going to the grid. You're essentially storing it to them. You're saying, hey, I have too much, I'm going to push it to you. And they're going to give you a credit for that. And then later, when the sun goes down, family's home, especially right now that the time changes happen again and it gets darker earlier, more energy is now drawn from the grid. And so I stored energy to the grid later, and now later in the day, I need that energy, and the grid is going to charge me for it. And in net metering markets, it's 1-to-1. That works out fine because I'm sending to the grid at one rate and I'm importing out at the same rate. And so it all levels out. And so that works well, right? Like that is the ideal. And in many markets today, this still stands true. But this really becomes a problem in markets where rates change over time. So again, in net metering, this works fine. Excess goes to the grid. That's essentially your battery. You're going to pull it back from the grid when you need it. You get a 1-to-1 credit, and that works out. When we think of a time of use market, and some of you might not even know what time of use is. Maybe you're selling in only certain states that don't even have these. Time of use, and me in California, this is essentially what my bill looks like, where I could be paying a swing of 73 cents during 3 or 4 hours of the day, where during an off-peak time, I could pay 36 cents. So literally more than double of what I might be paying one part of the day, I'd be paying later in the day. The problem is this peak is typically when I would not be producing solar. So solar is not able to meet my demand. That means I'm pulling from the grid during a very expensive time. And if I'm not getting the same credit of when I push to the grid or when I import from the grid, then I start really having a problem. If we look at these, when you take time of use and then you take a problem with net billing where you're not getting a 1-to-1, you really get hosed, right? So what happens is when I'm producing solar during this excess time and I'm sending it to, it's giving me about 9 cents credit for that. Okay, but later when I need to pull from the grid, I'm pulling it at 73 cents. So that's a 64-cent swing that I am not getting credit for, where in a net metering market I would, and so that's not a problem. But this becomes a huge problem for me, right? Solar, in a time of use market combined where you don't have net metering is not enough to save people money. And that is obviously a problem. That's not what we're trying to do in this industry. We want to try to help people become resilient, but also save on their bill. So how do you solve this, right, with storage? How does this work? Because I can't utilize the grid as my battery in this sense, because if I push it there, they're not giving me the same credit as when I pull it. And so that whole system breaks down. So let's now look at what this could look like if I add a battery. So now under a model of self-consumption, right? So there's backup and self-consumption, which we'll talk about today, the difference. But self-consumption essentially means I want to become the grid. I want to store excess energy in my battery. And then during peak times, I want to use that energy so that I'm no longer reliant on the grid. And that differential between my import and export rate, I'm no longer going to get hosed by. So what happens is during this time where we saw on the other curve, I have all this excess energy. Well, all that excess energy now goes into storing it into my battery that I have. And then I get to top it off. So I get to store that battery. Any excess then, right? I've stored my battery. Any excess will go to the grid because after I've stored my battery, I have to send that somewhere. And so I'll go to the grid. That's what this orange will show. Then later, when the sun goes down, I have a lot of energy needs and I can no longer get it from my solar system. I have to pull that energy from somewhere. Now I want to pull it from my battery. And I'm essentially getting a one-to-one, right? I'm storing it and pulling it out at the same rate because I own the battery. I'm essentially a mini grid at that point. And so that's the benefit of self-consumption, this really expensive time of day. Instead of pulling from the grid, I can pull from myself and I can essentially get a net metering program within my own house where I can't get this if I, again, don't have that battery. What's really interesting, and this is data you can go find, and if you have a system you can model, and we have this in Enerflo, you could build a California system solar only. Then you could add a $15,000 battery, and you'll actually see a higher 25-year savings, even with that $15,000 battery, than just solar alone. And so it is really interesting if you're doing the math correctly and you're going through these equations, which we'll talk more about of how we get there, you actually can see more savings with solar plus storage, even though the ticket item of the package is much higher, sometimes 20% higher because of the cost of a Tesla or a couple Enphases or whatever you might be using. And so this shows here, if you look at PG&E, SDG&E, or SCE, if you look at only solar, a lot of times in that year one, they might be seeing a 24% less savings just in that first year. And it might take a full 30 years for them to actually see any savings at all. Where if you add a battery, they could have savings as early as year one or much quicker savings, right, as early as year one. But then you look at lifetime savings in PG&E, it doubles. In SDG&E, it's up by at least 40%. And then SCE, again, huge swing in how much more energy or how much more you're going to save over time, even though you're adding the cost of the battery to your system. So this is where math becomes really important, right? If I'm going to add a $15,000 ticket item, I want to ensure my savings calculation is correct, because if it's not, then the ROI period, the time I'm going to start seeing savings is way out of whack, and I'm not really showing the customer a good example or model of what they could expect from a savings standpoint. And that's critical in these markets where there's net billing or time of use. So we have a new tool to make this really easy. One, to size a battery. When we think of backup, right? How big of a battery do I need? There's a lot of factors that go into it, and we'll go deeper in that as Emily demos this tool for us. But we created a tool to make the sizing of batteries easier and just much more straightforward and more of a conversation with the homeowner. Once you've selected the battery, you then need to know how to project savings. And you actually have to do this at an hourly level. There's 8,760 hours in a year. Project that across 30 years. We're talking about a lot of hours that have to be modeled of what's going to happen with the system. What is degradation of the solar going to look like? What is the round trip efficiency of the battery? What about depth of discharge? What about the warranty period? All these things have to be factored in to get savings correct. And Enerflo and our R&D labs, if you'll say, we've been working on this problem for a long time, and we're really excited that we have cracked the code, if you will, on how to do this properly. And that's where the financial impact comes in, right? If I use the tool to size a battery, I've now added a battery to the system. I now need to project that savings out 25 or 30 years. We need to run a ton of math and do that really quickly. And that's what we've done to show that savings of what will happen and what the impact is. So with that kind of overview, and again, the need of batteries for us all to understand batteries, knowing batteries will come to market, knowing in your market, people might be like, hey, I'm tired of outages, I want backup, or you're into selling in a California market or others where you have net billing, you need to know how these batteries work, and you need to show savings properly to the consumer. So let's jump to the demo. So Emily, I'm gonna get out of sharing my screen, and then let's make sure that you can share and let you take it from here.
Thanks so much, Pat. No pressure on that tee up. Now I'm very excited. Like Pat mentioned, we've been working on this for quite a while. It's been a lot of discussions trying to make sure that we got all the math right and accounted for. So finally seeing everything come to fruition is very exciting for my team and I. So I'm going to take you through a deal that, in this case, first, I have actually one in New Jersey. I'm from the Northeast, so something a little bit more in my backyard. So this is not a market that has time of use. This might be one that needs more backup, but I'm going to let the tool speak for that. Just briefly going over some of the other bits of information gathering that we have in our Enerflo deals to help make things more accurate and really dialed in as much as possible on each particular deal. I've got standard pre-qual questions. I won't necessarily go through all of those, but I did want to show briefly our title check that we have. This, using data tree, I'm not going to actually add this customer's name. It is very advantageous to make sure that when you do get to things like loan doc signing and contract signing, that you do have the correct name, no nicknames or the wrong homeowner, God forbid. I'm just going to go ahead and keep my battery webinar name. But the other thing that this gives us that I wanted to show is that when we go into our consumption profile, which is where we pull from Genability the usage for the year and the utility bills, we actually are factoring in the square footage of the home as well. So we pass this information into our estimator service to just really dial in as much as possible on this particular home, what the usage is going to look like. One thing too I wanted to call out, and this will be especially relevant when I do a California deal later, we do have our tariffs here. This is where those like time of use plans that Pat mentioned would come into play if you wanted to ensure greatest accuracy of savings, picking the right ones here. We try to filter those in those particular markets so that reps get to those right answers as quickly as possible, but always good just to verify. So I've got my consumption information now. If I wanted to, I can dial this in with monthly usage data or bill data from the homeowner themselves. I can put an annual as well too, but I'm just going to go with the estimator here for now. I've got that. I've got my arealytic design here. That's another one of those integrations that Pat mentioned earlier. This is a quick design. It took me less than a minute to get, and AI took it away and did it for me, just to show a little bit too how you can modify some of the design elements here, including adding a battery. Just another way beyond the sizing tool that you can. This will just load up real fast for me here. I've got all sorts of bells and whistles that I can touch, but one thing I just wanted to show here, modifying the design. I've got, these are based off of my like administrative defaults, but I can make some changes if need be. I can add a battery here if I'd like. If I did that, for example, I'll go ahead. This is actually going to clone my design so that now I have two designs. I don't need to worry about messing up my first one. I can go in isolation and compare with the homeowner to find what's best for them. Just very easily, very little input from me. Just letting that save there. And now it's going to open up. I'm going to exit out of this though, just for time. But that's going to be loading up, and I can see it's essentially the same design, just this one has that battery that I've added and the other one does not. Continuing on though, I'm going to create a proposal using that first arealytic design that doesn't have a battery. Just grab that arealytic design. I'm just going to go ahead and use a good leap. Just as a call out, this sizing tool to start is just going to be available for finance and cash deals. It is going to be available later for TPO. We'll talk about that a little bit more later, but just to start, it will be for financing. And another thing I'll be talking about is this Optimus template here. So I've got a particular slide deck for this tool specially set up. I'll show you some of the other bells and whistles that'll come with later, but I've got this set up. My reps didn't need to select anything. It was there for them because I set it up that way. Create my proposal and we'll jump in. Oh, there we go.
This is where the engine's running.
Yes, this is right now where all of those calculations and math are happening. So that 1,760, I think it is, the number of hours that are running, all of that, both for the usage data, we're getting the hourly production data, we're getting the utility escalators accounted for, the degradation, all that math is run, and now I'm ready to go. Got here, show just the slide deck here. I've got my battery sizing slide added in there. And now I get to use all of that data that I've been running. So we've got some defaults in here just to get things started, but the idea would be that a rep would come here and now is discussing with the homeowner to figure out what those needs best are. Really just dial it in. These up here are just meant to be informative. So based on the inputs here. So we've got a season, we've got the purpose, we've got the desired backup power and the battery backup hours. These help dictate what day essentially we're targeting. Now, depending on the purpose, that's going to be a little bit of a different intention. If you're doing backup, you might want to target essentially your worst case scenario. So in the summertime, for the address I've selected, I have my worst offset, though the day that my solar is just not going to really cut it. So if I can prepare for this worst case scenario, I'm set for all of the better ones. If I wanted to do something like self-consumption instead, even though this isn't a time of use market, maybe I do still want to mitigate my utility costs. Now I've got a different offset because I'm targeting a different day. This is going to be, best way to describe it is like the mean offset. So the most common percentage that I'm going to have each day, my most common day-to-day use, let me help mitigate that as best as possible. I'm going to go back to backup for this, but just wanted to show that. Some of the other things, I've got summer and winter. Again, I'm up in the Northeast, so maybe I want to target, if I have electric heating, I want to make sure that I don't lose that in the middle of January if there's an outage, snowstorm knocks over power lines or what have you. So this toggle is up here for that. This backup percentage, this is essentially how aggressively I want to mitigate the daily usage for whatever day I've selected here. So if I want to just make sure that I, only have just the bare essentials, I don't need to have everything running in my house, just a few things, then I can get a smaller size battery. Or maybe I'm just so aggressive, I want as much running as possible. I'm going to go back to this moderate, but that's essentially, again, dialing in for the homeowner, how much appetite for a battery they have and how they want to use it. And then these hours here, this basically goes again for the usage that I've targeted. Which hours of my usage do I want to have the battery really focusing on mitigating? If it's like Pat mentioned, where the usage is highest after everybody's getting home from work and school and I'm running the majority of things, then I'll target those later hours. If I've got that time of use scenario where I know that maybe the hours of 5 to 8 p.m. are the most expensive, whatever it happens to be, that is going to help do the final decision on how much battery essentially I need for what I've dictated. Now you can see here, I've got a few different options here. I've actually got 4 or 5 of them. Obviously, this is going to depend on the installer in question, what they've got available battery-wise in those particular markets. So this is going to be a catered list depending on all of those things. We're not going to show batteries that the installer isn't selling, but based on that, it's going to order them, it's going to price them out. We're going to try to size up the quantities depending on, again, that need. So you can see the Enphase Encharge 3 batteries. These are smaller stackable batteries. So I've got 3 versus these guys just being 1. Now I can go based on this input. I can toggle these quantities as I need. Another tool I have at my disposal is this breakdown chart. So this is showing some of the similar info that Pat had on his chart. So we've got my solar energy generation here. So this is the hourly production curve. Got the energy demand. This is the consumption. And then I've got this blue line here. This is if I could essentially dream up a battery perfectly matched to what I have told it I want to do. What does that battery look like? I can see the hours I've highlighted here and I can change them. Maybe I want to do till 10 p.m. again, which is what I had before, whatever it happens to be, and it'll adjust that for me. And now I can take the battery options that I have here and I can see how they stack up against that ideal scenario and find which one meets those needs best. Obviously, it's going to depend on the homeowner and the price and what needs, but at least as far as performance-wise, which one is most dialed into what I'm looking for. So it looks like maybe the Enphases might be good. A couple of the other ones are a little less or a little over-prepared or under-prepared for what I'm aiming to do. So I'm looking at these Enphase batteries I have here. And I can go ahead again and change those as I want, but I'm just going to go ahead and select that now. And just as if I had the batteries already on my design before, if I had gotten them from a designer, they've been added in. I didn't need to hit any extra buttons or go to other places in the deal. It's done. If I want to change that after the fact, I certainly can. I can change my purpose. I can change the quantity. I can rerun the recommendations if need be, whatever suits my needs. And then I can continue with the rest of the slideshow, including going to that savings that Pat had mentioned. So here, just as a reminder, I'm not going to go through all the math, of course, but things we're taking into account, all that hourly production and usage. We're taking into account minimum costs from utilities, fixed costs that they have in every monthly bill, the export rates that are getting markets like California, where they're only going to give you 9 cents versus you paying 73 cents, or what all of that is taken into account, as well as the cost of the system. and hopefully showing the homeowner that this is going to be a worthwhile investment for them. So that's the first deal that I have. Sorry, I'm getting over a little something. I do just want to briefly go over that California scenario, just because that is what we've been talking about. So here, I'm going to load up this proposal that I've had already just to save some time. Again, it's doing all that math for me. Now here, again, I already had a battery set up. I can run the recommendations again if I want to, but I've got that situated. I've got my self-consumption because I have that time of use market. Just as a reminder, by the way, with the consumption profile, this is just another way to get to that same info, but this post-solar tariff, this is where it's essentially declaring those are the rates that I want to be calculating my savings against. So we're going to filter this so the rep gets to the right answers as soon as possible. So I've got my post-solar tariffs, I've got my battery. In this case, I've chosen a Generac one, and I can go to that savings slide, and it's going to be taking all of that information into account. I could see how much the monthly utility bill is shrinking by utilizing that battery to mitigate that grid usage and essentially become my own mini grid, as Pat said. One other thing that I did want to show with that battery slide template, that Optimus template that I mentioned, not only does it have my battery slide, but I've also included a couple of additional information-based slides that we're only going to show because I've chosen a Generac battery in this case. So I've set up filters to say if this manufacturer is chosen, I want to show these slides. That way I don't have to add them to every slideshow and have my reps talk around them if they're not appropriate. They only show when they're needed. And hopefully I can help with that reps conversation with the homeowner at the kitchen table, making sure that they feel well informed and good about their purchase. So I've got a couple different things here that I've added in. I've even got some videos, lots of content that you can add that'll only, again, show when it needs to. And as far as how to do that, just very briefly, don't want to derail our webinar too much. I've got this slide here, or this tab here. I got here by going to Settings, Proposal, Optimus Templates. And here's where I have that slide deck set up. So we've got our default ones. I have my battery sizer, and then I've added these Generac ones here. You can see they've got a custom slide icon just so I can find them fast. And I can do the visibility settings here. So I can base them based on the equipment, only for the certain pieces of equipment that I want them to show for. I could even target them to show for only specific organizations. I can target certain adders. There's lots you can do here to really cater that slideshow. Pat, anything you'd like to add?
No, that's awesome. Maybe while you're back here, maybe show how you can set up pricing for a battery.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And a lot of people are like, hey, my first one, I want to do 15,000 because it includes the install and the inverter, and then additional ones I might want to do less. So maybe show a couple of those scenarios.
Perfect. Yeah. Like Pat mentioned, we do hear a lot of those kind of scenarios of people involving their kind of upfront installation cost into the first unit, and then they discount any subsequent units since they've already taken account of that. Good way to do that, setting up our pricing options, is this fixed per unit here. What I can basically do is set up different tiers, and every quantity will essentially add in. The last one will always be this plus, just to show that any additional one is going to be there. So I can set up a new add thing here. So the first one's going to be 7,500. The second one's going to be 4,000. If I want the third one to also be 4,000, I can do that. And then maybe anything 4 and above is only going to be 3,500, whatever it happens to be. I can target that this way. If I want to, even I can target this system to be in particular markets. Maybe I have more expensive installation costs in one market versus another. I can use my targets to set this up. Obviously, it's going to depend on your setup. We're just set up for the whole US. But if I had a California market, I could exclude or include it here. And then I can add an additional pricing option on top of that to account for my other markets. So all of this logic is happening in the background so that reps aren't having to remember, oh, wait, I'm here, so it's this cost for the first two, and then that one for the third one. It's all taken into account for them.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, thanks for going through that. Just as a recap of this battery solution that we were talking about, it's really solving a few things. One, we're taking into account all of the savings, right? Which is becoming more important as AGs are coming in, regulations being talking about, how are we showing savings to customers? We've done all that work for you, so you don't have to worry about it, and it's super accurate. Number two, we have the ability to give reps an easy way to size a battery and understand based on this system that has this offset, what size battery should I have based on the goals of the homeowner. Number three, we have the ability for you to add specific battery content. I see not enough people doing this, where if you are selling an Enphase or a Tesla, you want to reinforce what are the benefits of that to the homeowner. Show them a quick video of how they might use their battery app and all the intelligence that happens when you add storage, because storage is really the brains of the system, right? When you add a battery that can intelligently change how it works on any given day, that's something you should reinforce with the homeowner. So adding content specific to the manufacturers that you're selling, another huge benefit. And so we really tried to solve all things batteries with this. We have more things that are coming that we're excited about, but we did enough that this can be the first release and get it into your hands and you can start getting the benefit. So what I'll cover here is just a couple recap items. And then I know I'm seeing some Q&A come in, and so we'll answer those questions as well. So if you have other questions, please go to the Q&A or put it in the chat, and we'll make sure we get those for the next 10 minutes or so. So just a quick recap. Again, this is available to all Enerflo partners, and we are giving it to you at no additional cost. We felt like this just needs to be an enhancement to our system. It's an improvement for everybody. And we want all of you to have it to better sell batteries and be more transparent with homeowners. So this is not an upcharge, nothing that you have to pay differently. All you have to do is actually turn it on. And so to do that, talk to your PSM, your partner success manager, tell them you want it turned on. We can walk you through those steps. You want to make sure you have your equipment in there, your pricing set up properly, if you want to add content to the slides. And then we want to make sure you train your team on how to use it. And so your partner success manager can help with all of those. Let's jump to Q&A then. I know there's a few coming in here, so I'm just going to come over here. I love it. I'm seeing 9 questions. See how quickly we can get through these. Emily, I'll let you take this one. Can we add a battery to an existing solar home that another company has installed? Do you want to talk through how we solve for that?
Yes, I can talk about that. We call it an existing system because it's already on the home. Now, the answer to your question is yes. I will say that there are a few assumptions that we have to make, since in the case of an existing system, we don't know all of the details of the panels and their specs, those round trip efficiencies and degradation and everything. So we did have to go with some averages. So it will be as accurate as we can make it with our savings calculations, with those kind of hamstrings taken into account. But yes, you can.
Yeah, so essentially that design step she was showing earlier, you obviously wouldn't run a brand new design. You would click existing design, add in the equipment that was used, how many panels, what the production was. Just give us as much data as you have about that existing design. Then you can add a battery to it and it'll run all of our models and savings and everything. And then you can sell that battery add-on deal. And in the future, we hope to have battery financing and a few other things to keep enhancing that, because we know that add-on systems are a great revenue stream for customers. Okay, next one. Does adding a battery to an 80% offset help with the other 20% or more? Now, that's an interesting one, right? So what you have to think about with an 80% offset and the size of your battery, are there enough hours in the day where solar is producing enough that you can actually charge the battery? So it's hard to say that in every market, that use case of, oh, if you're 80%, sure, the battery will help with that offset. It really is going to depend on how many hours are in the day and how much energy is being used and whether you can actually charge that battery or not. If you're not producing enough energy over enough hours, you'll never really charge the battery fully on a given day. Then when you go to pull from it, you don't have as much to pull from. So that is something taken into account into our engine. And you can see that by adding a battery and kind of looking at the model, is you'll understand, wait a second, am I ever charging it fully to actually get the full benefit of it? So unfortunately, the answer is it depends, but our tool does take that into account when it's running its models.
The only thing I might add there too is that's exactly where some of that conversation piece around some of the other inputs, like that desired backup percentage and the hours that the homeowner wants to target. If you have that kind of scenario where you're wondering, do we have enough battery to, like, are we being too ambitious essentially with trying to tackle that offset? That's where you can have that conversation and be like, okay, how much do you actually need? Maybe you can do this if you're just trying to keep your fridge and your AC running in case of an outage or whatever it happens to be. That's how we can help shape those conversations using the tool.
Yeah, and I think from a backup scenario, backup goals at an 80% offset are different than self-consumption goals to really get the benefit of self-consumption and a net billing or time use market, you really need to fill that battery because
Yeah.
you from it later. Where backup, yeah, you can do a smaller battery on an 80% offset because it'll be charged and sitting there and waiting until it's actually needed. All right, this is one I knew we were going to get a question on. I'll let you take this one as well.
Yes.
If how batteries are integrated into leases and PPAs and which finance companies that can work with.
Yes.
Take that
So
one.
just as a brief reminder, part of the reason that we have this tool coming out just for financing is because that decision of how they work in with leases and PPAs is so complex. And a lot of times, in order to get an accurate quote, you have to have all of that information up front because there are going to be different products and ways that those, TPO lenders want you to display that to the homeowner. So that's why it is going to be coming later, but it's a completely different ballgame. So as far as what we do have though right now with those sorts of TPO situations and batteries, we have a couple of TPO lenders that we're integrated with for those scenarios with batteries in particular, LightReach, GoodLeap TPO, just as a couple of examples. And when it comes to the savings calculations that we're doing, which are already live, they're very well informed and have been looking with a close magnifying glass as far as how well we're doing. So the fact that we've got essentially a gold star on our savings calculations from those parties has been a confidence booster just because they do care so much.
Yeah, so in short, you can add a battery for a TPO deal. It just is not in the interface Emily showed where you're running, we help size it for you, but absolutely can still add a battery, unlock those battery products from the lender, and then it will run on our savings engine that's still very accurate. So it's really just missing that interface of being able to size the battery. But as we mentioned, that's something we hope to come soon. Let's go to another one. How does a Generac battery compare to a Tesla battery? That's not the scope of this webinar. I think if I had Generac on and Tesla on, they would both have a lot of things to say. I'm not sure I'm the one to say that. But yeah, there's a lot of people who can probably do that better than I could. Let's jump to this other one. Is this currently implemented or is being added on the next update? So the savings engine we've been talking about, this 87, 60 hours, over 20 hours, that's actually been live for all of you for about 6-8 weeks. We rolled it out and gave everybody that kind of as a precursor to adding this sizing tool. So you're already getting the benefit of if you've been adding batteries and you've been running savings calculations, you've already seen this with maybe not knowing that we've ran this big enhancement. The sizing tool Emily showed you now is basically available at the end of this week. And so you can already start reaching out to your PSMs and saying, hey, I want to get this turned on, and we can add that sizing tool for you. But again, from a savings standpoint, that's actually been rolled out for a while. And the ability to add batteries for TPO deals and so forth. Let's see. So we add the additional pricing after the selection of the battery that will be used. Yeah, once a battery is chosen, either through that tool or if it's added on a design, the pricing that Emily was walking through, that gets added to the cost of the system. Dealer fees then get added up to that. And so all of the pricing for your battery needs is handled. If you're adding a battery to a TPO deal, again, depending on the TPO provider, that cost of the battery as well is also built into that monthly cost. Any pricing related issues you might have with batteries, I believe we've solved for and feel confident about that. Can we sell battery only, no PV included? You want to take that one, Emily? No, that one comes up.
I think we had that one earlier a little bit too, but just to reiterate, we do have the ability currently outside of this sizing tool even to sell battery only deals. Now that is something that does require a little bit of setup as well, just to make sure that your pricing model is up to date and can account for those two different solar scenarios. PSMs are all very well versed in getting those updates made and getting that rolled out. So talking to your PSM is the best course of action there.
Yeah, and the cool thing with that too is Enerflo has these deal templates, right? Where a solar deal, you might want to run the title and do a design and do a proposal and do contracting and all these solar specific things. You can have a battery only deal set up with very few steps and just specific to knowing if you're going to do a battery only deal. Yes, that's something we handle and cover. And you could even have a whole different presentation just for those battery deals compared to if you're doing solar plus storage. Does this transfer into Everbright data or the finance company used? So short answer is it depends, right? Everbright is done outside of Enerflo. It has to be in their system. Any battery management or whatever is done there. That's not something Enerflo handles because Everbright requires deals to be done in their system. But with all the other finance companies, we're sending the equipment specs to them as part of the application process, and all of that syncing we can do is all handled by us. It's going to depend on the integration, but all major finance companies you guys are probably using, we have a deep integration with, and that equipment would be passed over with the deal. All right. Does Enerflo display any type of total cost of ownership calculation? Not really in the way you're asking. We do cover it from the sense of your utility, you're going to keep paying this. If you add batteries, you're going to, or just your equipment in general, you're going to have this cost. But as far as like a sum up of all your payments over time and just showing that one number, we're not really doing that today, but we're just highlighting the savings or the delta between that cost of ownership or sticking with the utility, and we're showing that, but we're not specifically showing that cost of ownership number today. Another one said, too awesome. Okay, love that. Love that. Thank you for that. How does Enerflo demonstrate battery value add stacking? I'm not sure exactly what the question is, but if you're
I'm wondering if this is talking about like the end phases, for example, of
let's take that. If you want to take that one as interpreting it that way.
essentially with that sizing tool, there is that quantity that the rep can increase or decrease based on the conversation with the homeowner. Our sizing tool will try to, when it's running the recommendation, get that quantity to where we feel it needs to be based on what they've told us they want. And then from there, the rep can fine tune. So it does support that ability to stack. Like I think on my deal, 4 or 5 and phase uncharged 3s. One thing I will say that we don't do currently, we've talked about maybe adding to our roadmap in the future, is putting in guardrails to prevent people from adding too many. Right now, that part is up to the user to essentially know, okay, I can't add 20 end phase and charge batteries, not how they work, but we do allow for that increased amount. Essentially, it's not just one or none.
Yeah, so a lot of times I see installers, they have, let's just call it Enphase and Tesla or Lion and Generac or whatever, and they have both, right? Where it's like, hey, I'm selling a smaller system. I need a stackable battery because maybe they only need 5 kilowatts. Maybe they only need a 10 kilowatt battery, where Tesla's 13 and a half, right? So Tesla in some markets could be a lot bigger than they really need. And so that's why, again, we know a lot of guys have 1, 2, 3 models they're installing. That's why this tool tries to figure out those quantities for you and just give the rep these quick math really to know what they might be using. On the demonstration, it looked like backup was an option. Is rate arbitrage or non-back an option? And what are different options available in the dropdown? So yeah, that is actually what self-consumption is. That's what's used in net billing or time of use markets, where I'm not using a battery for backup. I'm using it on a daily basis to pull from my battery so I can get cost savings. Now, there is a difference between self-consumption and arbitrage. They're actually very close in like the yield or the output of the savings, but we do have plans in the future to add arbitrage as a third option, where it is taking advantage of export or import rates at given times of the day. Not every battery can actually do that, and not every market actually supports that. So self-consumption is going to work for most people and most TPO providers. That's kind of the model they use for savings, but we do plan on the future in adding arbitrage as well. When adding a battery, can this be added to a PPA after the sale? No, that would require a change order. A lot of times when you're running, especially for a PPA, you need to run what is the 25-year production yield, and what am I going to yield enough power to, charge at that kilowatt rate, and am I going to make money as the asset owner? And so no, if you're going to add a battery to a PPA deal, it really does need to run through the calculation and modeling again to make sure that there is a 1-year savings, which most TPO providers require. So it would be a change order. How does Enerflo demonstrate the cost to the customer versus the adder cost to the rep? Is there a way to build in a commission for battery sales? It's a great question. We don't really handle like commission-based line items or costing. And so typically what rep, especially on a finance deal, they're going to put in kind of their base PPW of where they want it to be, and then they can gross it up from there. So there's a few ways for a rep to add on some margin to a battery. That can either be done in the pricing rules, like that can be baked in for everybody, or he could change his base price per watt, maybe 5 cents, 10 cents up when he adds the battery to make sure he's getting margin on the battery. So again, it just depends on how that's handled. But again, our pricing configurator is very robust. And so I'm sure, again, if you have a scenario you want to make sure we account for, you can get with your PSM and they can walk you through the best way to set that up. We're going to call it there. It's been 48 minutes and appreciate your guys' time. Hopefully you're as excited about this as we are. Just want to say thanks to all of you installers or partners who jumped on with us over the last 6 months, helped us beta test, helped us look through this, talk through it. Hey, is this a good way to handle this scenario, and get a lot of feedback so that we could launch something that you can use and take advantage of and give you more value. So we appreciate all you and your partnership. Reach out, let us know if there's anything we can do to help you. If you're not an Enerflo partner today, please scan the QR code, go to enerflo.com, fill out a lead form, and one of our platform consultants would be happy to chat with you and make sure that we're a fit for you. So did I miss anything, Rebecca? Or is that...
You got it all. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you both so much. This was fantastic.
I appreciate it.
Thanks.
We'll see you all out there.
Take care, everybody.